Hello, this is Alan Zimmerman, and the subject of today's presentation is the recent population study that the US Census Bureau put out in early November, which took their long term forecast out to the year 2100. The previous forecast that they had done had gone out to 2060. Now, the reason for doing this is I have just long believed that studying demographics is critical for developing corporate strategies. Certainly for insurers, which I focus on mainly, but frankly for all companies in all industries. So whenever I see a new publication, I really spend some time to try and understand, what the bureau is getting at. So with that, let me share my screen and we'll start the presentation. So again, the topic is the updated population study that the Census Bureau put out earlier in November, and the key point that the media picked up, in which the bureau stressed, is that they now believe that the U.S. population will peak in the year 2080 and decline thereafter. And then, well, that's an interesting point and somewhat of a foreboding point. I think it's too far out in the future to affect near-term corporate strategies. But what I do think is important is to focus on is the fact that the Bureau has lowered their forecast compared to what they were thinking previously. And you can see on this chart that by 2030, their forecast now calls for a population that's 3% lower than they previously thought. And by 2060, they now think the population will be 10% lower. Now that's important is simply for the economy, because population and growth are very closely linked. So this is going to make it harder for all companies to grow, and it's going to take much more of a tightening on corporate strategies. So when looking at that, I think it's important to understand how a population forecast develops. So when you think about how a population changes, there are really two components. The first is just the difference between births and deaths, which demographers uh, think of as or call the natural change. And then there's immigration. I mean, plain and simply, the number of people moving in and out of a country. So if you look at this chart, you can see the key component of the current forecast. The Bureau expects that the declining birth rate, which is going on for quite a while, is going to continue, and deaths will naturally increase with an aging population. So if you look at this chart, what this shows is that the Bureau now believes that the natural change will turn negative somewhere out around 2038. Um, and so if you take that further, what that means is that the only thing that's driving the population is immigration. And you can see in this forecast that the Bureau, on average, expects that immigration will average about 1 million people a year. And in doing that, it would take the natural change, and stretch out to the net change out to 2080. Now, in doing this, the Bureau recognizes that immigration is probably the biggest uncertain factor here. So they've got alternative scenarios, which could take the immigration as high as 1.5 million and as low as 500,000. Uh, and if the average is 1.5 million per year, then the population won't decline, and as they currently expect. So those are the changes. The other thing that I think is interesting is that the forecast of declining population puts the U.S. in the same position as a lot of other countries. Germany and Italy expect the population to decline out in the future. But importantly, it's already happening in Japan. So I think it's interesting to sort of just look at Japan and compare Japan to the United States to understand how the forecasts are different. So if you look at this, the left-hand chart, you can see that the Japanese population grew fairly substantially in the post-war industrialization period, but then it peaked maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and you can see that on the right, that the birth rate was declining and the deaths were increasing, and the natural change turned negative. Yeah, and remember, Japan doesn't have much immigration, so the natural change is a key driver of population. When you compare the U.S. and Japan, you can see in the left-hand side that then these are have different scales. But the U.S. population to date has continued to grow, compared to Japan, which has turned negative. If you look at the two components on the right, you can see that the decline in birth in Japan is much greater than in the US. And the deaths, because the population is older, were rising faster. So, quite simply, you put falling births together with rising deaths, and you get a declining population. So that's interesting. Now, naturally, and as populations change, the implications of this are going to be profound over time. And we could spend hours just talking about changes in the composition of the country and things like that. But I want to just highlight 2 points which I think are really important. Um, One is just the aging population means that at some point, and actually in a fairly close time, the number of people 65 and over in the country is going to exceed the number of people 18 and under. And you can see that in the top chart, that's somewhere along the line with a growing older population and a declining younger population is going to be a crossover. The second point, which I also think is really important, is that the number of people in the key working years, which most economists define as 25 to 54, are going to start to decline at some point, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on social funding, Social Security, and Medicare, and which are frankly already facing serious challenges. So there's going to be a serious problem with this declining population. So these are the key points. I think it's interesting, and as I said, I think uh, it's important to focus on um, population data whenever it comes out, because, as I said at the beginning, I really think that that's an important part of all corporate strategy development. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and like anything else, please contact us if you like to talk about this in more detail.